Shalom WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah Talk. This week we will read Parshat Bo. One of the things that makes Parshat Bo really incredible, and it's a great Parsha where we read the end of the Exodus story, the last plague of Machat Bechorot, of the death of the firstborn, and the slaughtering of the Passover lamb, and the putting of its blood on the doorposts and the lintels, so that the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, will pass over the Jewish houses. But before we get any of that, we get the command in chapter 12 for the Jewish people to keep a calendar. We read in verse 12:2, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim, rishon hu lachem l'chodshei hashana. This month shall mark for you, meaning the month of Nisan, when Passover occurs, at the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. And what's special about this command to keep a calendar? It seems to be pretty important. How often do we talk about the peculiarities of the Hebrew calendar, how the holidays move around each year as they compare to the solar secular calendar? But what makes it really special is that Rashi points out in his very first comment on the Torah that this, in Exodus chapter 12, is the very first mitzvah commanded to the entire Jewish people. Mitzvah number 1 on the list of 613 is keep a calendar. But it's odd that God would put this command as mitzvah 1 before even keeping the Passover, right? The Passover moment, as far as Rashi is concerned, is sort of the birth of the Jewish people as a nation. And so it's only at this point that we can start getting laws as a whole entire people. But why start with the calendar? Why not start with the Passover? There's a very important lesson in this, and I want to teach it in honor of, I'm recording this on the 102nd day that captives are being held in Gaza, Jewish captives underground. And that is that when it comes right down to it, the ability to perceive time, the right to understand time, the right to count days, the right to keep a calendar, is, the Torah is telling us, perhaps the most fundamental form of freedom that there is. Right? How you spend your time. That is the right to decide that. That is the difference between slavery and freedom. And the right to even count time is in itself a great privilege. These captives who are underground in tunnels in Gaza, do they even know that it's been 100 days? Do they know when a day comes and when a day goes? They don't have the right. But when God takes Moses and says, you're going to be free, the commentators from Rashi on indicate that God looked up at the sky, pointed up to the sky, showed Moses the sliver of a moon and said, this is it. Being able to see the sky, being able to perceive the passage of time in the phases of the moon, that is the most fundamental form of freedom. And that freedom has been taken away from the captives. The most basic freedom. And so their enslavement is complete. They don't have the right to their bodies. They don't have the right to say no to things being done to them or with them. They've lost their right to choose, and maybe most fundamentally, sitting in the dark in Gaza, they've lost the right to mark time. I was inspired thinking about this yesterday on Martin Luther King Day, to think of the good Reverend Dr. King in his captivity. His letter from a Birmingham jail, written from a time when he was maybe lawfully incarcerated, but immorally incarcerated, just like the captives that we're talking about. There's something amoral in this incarceration. So in his letter from a Birmingham jail, though, he said something that gives me hope. Dr. King said so many things that give us hope. Here he is talking about America, and he's talking about the treatment of African Americans, black people in America. But the words, I think, can be applied very much to the captives in Gaza. He's saying that this battle for freedom, this sacred tradition, goes on well before the founding even of the state of America. And so too, the victimization, the incarceration of these captives goes well before the creation even of a state of Israel, back to the most ancient times. The reason why the wisdom comes here in chapter 12 of Exodus that is still relevant today is because the Jewish people were founded on the hope of freedom and founded amidst those who would hate them and do harm to them merely because of who they were. Right? The Pharaoh of Egypt in this story is the first ruling anti-Semite, but we know he wouldn't be the last. And so the wisdom of the Torah, the wisdom of time and marking time and understanding the passage of time and the direction of history, all of that ties into part of the story of Israel. And I think that's the story that Dr. King is referring to here. In his letter, he writes, "We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up in the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our foreparents labored in this country without wages. They made cotton king, and they built the homes of their masters in the midst of brutal injustice and shameful humiliation. And yet out of a bottomless vitality, they continued to thrive and develop. And the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we face now will surely fail. We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. That same eternal will of God is embodied in our demands. Bring them home now." May that wish be fulfilled speedily in our days. May the freedom we read about in Parshat Bo, the freedom to mark time, the freedom to go where one wants to go and whenever one wants to go, may that freedom be granted the captives, and may we look to our heritage of oppression and cruelty and humiliation as an inspiration, just as Dr. King did, to pray for better things in the future, not only for the Jewish people, but for all people. Shabbat Shalom.